Okay, I have 10 a.m., so let's go ahead and get started. So hello, everyone, and welcome to With Open It's Possible, the 2023 Open Education Week virtual conference hosted by Texas Tech University Libraries. We want this to be a welcoming space, so any form of harassment will not be tolerated and may result in removal from the remainder of the virtual conference. As a courtesy to our speakers, please keep yourself muted, and we would encourage you to actually turn off your video during the presentation. This session is being recorded and will be posted on the library's YouTube channel after the conference has completed, and closed captioning has also been enabled. I will be putting a link in the chat that will direct you to the conference homepage, where you will find a brief description of the conference, our presentation schedule for the remainder of the week, and information about our keynote speaker. Please feel free to use the chat feature to submit questions at any time. I will be monitoring questions as they come in and ask them to the presenters during the Q&A portion of the presentation. If you'd like to ask a question anonymously, please chat with me directly and make sure to indicate that it's an anonymous question. You are also welcome to turn on your camera and verbally ask questions during the Q&A portion. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers for this presentation. So we have Sydney Brammer and Ryan Martinez from Texas Tech University, and they will be talking about a book for the next generation, reflecting on the process of creating an OER ebook for Gen Z. So welcome, Sydney and Ryan.
Hi, thanks, Sabrina. We're so excited to be here with everyone today. Our third author, Narissra Punyanunt-Carter, couldn't be here today. She sends her regards, but I think Ryan's going to take it away. I'll share my screen. If you can't see it, let me know. Just give me a shout.
No pressure. You got this.
Can you see it?
For me, it shows, Sydney has started screen sharing, but it doesn't show what's being shared on the screen.
Okay. Let's see. It's been a hot minute since we were zooming over here. All right. We'll try the PDF version. How about that? Can we see that one?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we will begin. So the process of an OER book is something that all three of us are very passionate about. I've always been interested in open source things. I'm a giant computer nerd. So in the computer world, when things are open source, I like the level of accessibility for people to be able to, utilize something for free instead of being held under some type of monetary value. And when it comes to college textbooks, they're so expensive. They're very pricey. Some of them are $80 to $200 for a textbook. So I'm very interested in just, in general, the OER experience. And when we were creating this textbook, this is a communications textbook that is basically communicating in close relationships. And this book in general has a different type of theme, and we're kind of creating it with this vision that it can connect with the Gen Z. It could be something that they're able to read and kind of appreciate. This textbook does have a different type of theme that's a little out there. It's an 80s themed textbook. So the chapters are actually aligned with different 80s songs that are very popular. 80s has been pretty popular in popular culture recently. So I think that this is something that can connect really well with the Gen Z, and it's fun. The cover art that you see right here was created by Sydney Brammer, and the cover art really does resonate with the entire book. It has a really strong art style, and a lot of the different chapters have stories throughout that follow different characters, and it all kind of relates to things within the communications studies world. If you would like to turn the slide, Sydney. So this book right here is basically for an introduction to kind of looking into the study of relationships through the communication studies lens. And it does have 12 different chapters in it. And these chapters kind of vary depending on what they are. We can see face-to-face versus online relationships. There's the chapters about discovering yourself, attraction, coming together, growing apart. There's levels of unhealthy relationships, navigating conflict, and maintaining relationships. There's also a chapter that features workplace relationships. But this book kind of dives into those different types of aspects, and each and every single chapter does fit this type of 80s theme. If you would like to turn that next slide. So for the OER feedback process for us, we sent out a survey of chapter 2, which is I still haven't found what I'm looking for. And chapter 2 is basically about who are you and discovering the self. And we pilot tested chapter 2. We sent it out through the comms research pool so that we can determine what students like and dislike about the content, visuals, platform, and the affordances of the press books. And some of the results that we found, just a general overview for a moment, is that the OER feedback survey, after we cleaned the data, there was 147 participants, and the devices that these participants used to complete the survey predominantly was on a laptop computer at 130. We have 8 on the desktop computer, 5 on the mobile phone, and 4 on the tablet. And participants basically had a check. They were able to proceed with the survey if they could kind of summarize the main focus of chapters 1 through 2 through glimming at it. If they weren't able to kind of understand that, then their attention checks, they failed, and then they were removed. So that's how we ended up with 147 participants. Now, when we look at the general format and preference when choosing a textbook, this is huge when it comes to Gen Z and having something that people can kind of utilize. In this day and age with technology, I believe that e-textbooks are very popular because not only can you access them on your desktop or laptop, you're able to pull it up on a cell phone or a tablet. So it makes that level of accessibility a lot more. It's very convenient. And as we can see, the preference that was chosen from the participants is for the ebook at 61%. We also have an option for hard copy at 31% and both at 7.5%. But some of the popular reasons behind these format preferences that the participants liked about it was the convenience. You know, some of them liked carrying a book around. Some of them like to have the ebook functionality. The cost is a lot cheaper when you do have an ebook. Accessibility is easier, of course, switching between different devices. And then also you can kind of navigate inside of the book. If you have an actual physical book, it's hard to kind of search through things and find content. When you're on an ebook, you're able to hit Control F or Command F on your computer, and you can search up any word. So kind of navigating throughout that textbook is a lot easier for students when it comes to finding particular definitions that they need to search for. And then making the use of different devices is something that is very popular, and also just not having that weight. So on the survey that we sent out, just to kind of get some feedback on how the participants are kind of viewing this, we can see that the visibility of the text was very easy to read on a desktop and a mobile phone and a tablet. On a laptop, it's still a very high number at 84.82%, but we can see that the overall average across devices is 86%. And visibility of the text is something that's very important, especially for an ebook, for people to be able to be reading it, especially if this book has 12 chapters, it's something they're carrying around and using for their coursework. We want to make it where it's easy to read, the text is very visible, and between these different devices, the format of it is going to be the same, but as far as them reading it on these devices, what's the easiest for them to be looking at that? Because a mobile phone, some people might be a little more comfortable holding a mobile phone up a little closer. Maybe the formatting is a little tighter than what it possibly could be on a laptop. And the helpfulness of visuals as well. This is something that's pretty big and very important when you're making an ebook, especially for Gen Z. You want to have things that are easily accessible, easy to read, and the clarity of the writing as far as getting the content across. Typically writing textbooks, you want to write at a lower level, maybe like a 7th or 8th grade knowledge level. And that is because you want to be able to get this content across, and you want to use that kind of level of audience analysis. You want everybody to be able to comprehend it and understand it. So the clarity of the writing was at a 79%. And then engaging the nature of the text was a 69%. And the content feeling real and believable. There's different stories that are told within these chapters that landed at 76%. And then understanding, the perceived understanding of the text. So what was being said, is it being understood properly? And that was at 80%. And as we can see, for helpfulness of visuals, individuals that were on a desktop reported the highest on this survey at 82%.
Thanks, Ryan. I have the fun job of talking about what they liked specifically about the content. And I think there's some really good key points we can pull out here that are particular to Gen Z and what they're looking for in an educational text. So what they really liked, number one, most frequently mentioned thing was high believability. So I believe that these characters have stories that could actually happen in real life. I believe that the content is presented in a way that makes sense. I can track logically what's going on. And then they liked that they could interact with the text, being able to click on glossary terms, easy to read, visual additions, general comments that you hope to get anytime you submit some writing for review. But I think they were especially interested in storytelling, right? If I'm going to put my time into reading the textbook, I want it to have some narrative appeal. Dislikes included the length of the chapter being long, which is funny because it's a relatively short textbook chapter. But every once in a while they were like, I need a little bit more interest. I need more visuals, or I need an interactive question. There's plenty of cool interactive things you can do in an ebook. And then every once in a while we saw some kind of stylistic comments, but for the most part, a lot of these are kind of subjective comments about the visual impact of the book, and they were a little more on board with the format of the content. So I think sometimes when we are talking about Gen Z, we're thinking about young people, we're like, oh, hit them with all the visuals. But if they aren't drawn into the story, the visuals alone might not be enough. They spoke about some of the particular visual interactive elements that we put in. In the chapter, we had a embedded YouTube video of a TED Talk and several still images, and they really liked the balance of text to visuals. We tried to break up every section or every 2 sections or so with a visual. That made it easier for them to kind of figure out where they were in the chapter. And they had no problem scrolling through there and moving from 2.1 to 2.2. In terms of dislikes, some of the things that they thought were fun fonts, pictures, colors, excitement, they also didn't like. They were like, it makes it more difficult for me to read when, the title is purple, or it's a serif font or whatever. So again, some subjectivity there, but ultimately we leaned into what was going to be more accessible in the long run, and went ahead and changed some of those colors just to make sure that text visibility was really high. We asked about the interactive components. Here in this chapter, it was the TED Talk, but in other chapters, it could be things like drop these different pieces into categories that you think suit the vocab word that we're trying to learn, any kind of interactive bit. And generally, they liked it. They liked that there were discussion questions in the chapter. At the end, there's a mixtape of song titles that kind of fit with the theme of the chapter, which was about identity and the self. And they liked those kind of fun, inventive elements that got them thinking and using their own life experiences to answer questions. But they did want more review questions. So what kind of question might be on a quiz or an exam? They want to see some hints at that. We asked if they had anything else they'd like to add, and we had a couple of comments that we thought were really important to consider. The first being that they said, it's fine for a beginner level textbook, which this is for an introduction to relationships, but that they expected the professor to have to do heavy lifting. And that says a lot about what Gen Z is expecting out of a textbook versus the class. In some cases, you could have a really dense textbook, and then are you still expecting the professor to unpack it? So something to think about there. The content being informative and properly laid out was great. That was kind of an indicator for us that it was working. And then they said specifically, I'd be okay reading this as an ebook, especially with the images and videos, which is exactly what we wanted, was to take advantage of the ebook format. Based on all of their feedback, we said, what can we do to kind of meet their needs and address what they want out of this book? And there were a couple of failures, right? Things they asked for that we couldn't do, like double spacing or adjusting the margins, or creating pages so they could flip through the book instead of having to scroll through a column of text. But ultimately, we were able to address their accessibility concerns about font colors. We increased all font size slightly. And then we did look for more opportunities to break up the text with visuals like they asked for, and continue to double check the appearance on those mobile devices, because we wanted them to be able to get to it from any device that they wanted to use. So these are all things that I think it's important to consider when we're talking about a generation of people who are used to navigating technology. They're very visually stimulated. They really want that kind of YouTube experience in an ebook. So we're really excited to see everything fully come together, but it's been a really interesting experience thinking more about what does a book look like for the future. So thanks for your time today. We're excited to answer your questions. We also like to thank the libraries, e-learning and academic partnerships, and the Office of the Provost for sponsoring the grant that made this project possible, and Sabrina for her expertise and enthusiastic support. But we welcome your questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sydney and Ryan. Yeah, I'll go ahead and open up for questions. Like I said, feel free to put them in the chat and I will read them, or you're welcome to unmute. So I have a question. I already know the answer to this, but these folks don't. So when you put out the survey, were the students aware that this was an open educational resource, so essentially a free textbook?
We tried to make it something where they weren't thinking about, okay, this book would be fine because it's free, and more like, this book is good for me because I'm excited about it and it's high quality. So it did mention in a couple places this is an OER ebook, but unless they went and looked up what OER meant, I don't think they were going to get into it. So for the most part, we were getting their honest answers and their assessment in terms of, if I had to pay for this book, would I like it? And I think that was a much more powerful perspective than if we were like, hey, you wouldn't have to pay for this, is it okay? Which is the struggle of OER. But and you could tell from one of the last answers there where they said, you know, I would like this as an ebook. Some of them were even thinking, what would this be like in print? So the attention to the details there was purposeful for them.
All right,
And then,
so one question in the chat. From your study, what is the most important thing Gen Z is looking for in a textbook?
Ryan, I think you can add on to this too, but I think the narrative appeal was something that they mentioned over and over and over. So they want to not just be skimming through a textbook looking for chunks of information or definitions for a word, but they want to be able to read it and appreciate the flow like you would if you were reading something for fun, which is really tricky when you're trying to write in an academic style, but worth it. And then the visual engagement. Ryan, do you think there's anything else to add there?
Yes, in each of the chapters, they kind of are, there's different types of various interpersonal relationships that take place that I think that Gen Z is interested in reading. I think the narrative really does drive the book to keep them interested, instead of some other textbooks that they're used to where it's just like copy and paste definition and trying to memorize something without any application. I think that the narratives that we have with these different storytellings really do kind of work as a way for them to utilize application with the content. So for instance, we have healthy relationships and what do they look like. We have unhealthy relationships. So there's stories that are being told about unhealthy relationships and certain characters that are going to be, used for that particular chapter. We have workplace relationships, we have attraction and what draws us together. We have the discovering yourself. We have moments in different chapters where we have the coming together and growing apart using Knapp's relational model. And we're going to have stories that are told for that. So these narratives and these characters, the Gen Z is able to kind of connect with. And it's something that is not only just kind of copy and paste of definition, but it's something that is applicable to them. So I think that that's something that's very important. And I also honestly, truly think that what's really important about ebooks is that you can use them on all your devices. And I've noticed with just students that I have in my own personal classes that when they're able to pull something up on their phone and read it while they're walking or during downtime, or if they're able to pull up that same thing on their laptop, desktop, tablet, it's a lot easier for them to be able to read it instead of always, carrying this book around. They're able to access this content at any given time. And I think that that's very important moving forward as far as textbooks go, is that having that high level accessibility where you're basically making it easier for them to engage with your book. So I think that that's something that's very important.
Yes, so we're using Pressbooks because the Raider Raider Pressbooks access is what works for us right now. So it will be available online, and that means that if they needed to make a PDF of it, they could. But part of what we're going to be working on this summer is creating the instructor resources and the kind of behind the scenes elements that'll go with it. And depending on what the library says and what we think is best, there might also end up being a PDF version of the book in that collection, just in case a professor needs a desk copy or something like that. But for the most part, it'll be in a browser.
Okay, I have one more question before we wrap up. So in one sentence from each of you, what would be your advice for faculty wanting to create an OER textbook for Gen Z?
Don't be afraid to push the limits of what you think the textbook can do. It doesn't have to look like every other textbook you've seen. That was 2 sentences.
I would recommend utilizing something with popular culture and having something that's like a theme. I think that that's kind of trending right now, especially, I mean, this is going to sound really cliche, but with like Stranger Things and other television shows that are based in the 80s, I think that this is something that's kind of fun for them, especially with fashion in general. So don't be afraid to kind of like pick a theme that's fun and go with it. That's a little different.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for the presentation. Like I said, everyone that's here, this was recorded. So as soon as the conference is over, these videos will be available on the Texas Tech Library's YouTube channel. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you all, and thanks, Sabrina.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.